Hello and welcome to the Heat Check podcast, the Miami Herald's Miami Heat podcast. I'm David Wilson. I'm joined, as always, on the other line by our beat writer here at the Herald. It's Anthony Chang. Anthony, what's going on?
Nothing much. Just a boring day in Miami. How are you?
A busy day around the NBA all of a sudden. Earlier today, we're talking. It is Tuesday afternoon. Earlier today, the Heat traded for Terry Rozier, traded Kyle Lowry away in order to get Terry Rozier. And in the last hour, the Bucks canned Adrian Griffin, the coach at the fourth best winning percentage in NBA history, as our friend of the show Tim Reynolds I saw tweeted out earlier. I don't know. Maybe that'll come up as we go here, but for the most part, we've got a big Heat story to talk about with Terry Rozier coming to Miami. I gotta say, I was looking at his basketball reference, kind of shocked. He's played more of his career in Charlotte than Boston now, which is like kind of crazy.
Been in Charlotte for a while.
Yeah, a long time. Obviously, I think the Heat have been struggling the last week or so. For the most part, it's been. I think we've said a lot. The season has gone to expectation, or maybe even overachieved expectations a little bit. Not that our expectations were super high for a regular season, but Heat hit a lull. I think a lot of people were wondering, given how close they've gotten so many times, given how obviously much they wanted to get a point guard in the offseason, and given the age of Jimmy Butler and the age of the roster, was a move coming? They obviously had a lot of flexibility to make a move with a lot of picks available. And they make one this week, finally. Kyle Lowry and a pick to the Hornets for Terry Rozier. Anthony, just what's your initial reaction to the move?
I think I understand why they made the move. I think they needed to do something. Mm-hmm. As evidenced by this week, like there were underlying issues, whether it was because of Kyle or not. Like they needed, like even as simple. I know it's kind of cliche, and I think Tyler here mentioned this after practice today. Like they just needed something different, like a new energy. Like it kind of had gotten stale and stagnant. I mean, it's been basically the same group now for 3+ years. Yeah. And if you just count the big three, quote unquote, the same group for almost 5 years,
and
4 or 5 years.
And especially with Jaime Jaquez out for the last 2 weeks, like you felt all of a sudden, like because he was that infusion of new energy you had. He goes out of lineup, and
I felt like last season.
It's not all correlation, but all of a sudden the Heat, like they've kind of fallen apart over the last week plus here.
Yeah, and there are issues that were bothering them last season that were also an issue this season that were hidden by the Heat's like really good 3-point shooting. They didn't get to the rim that much. I mean, they scored under 100 points in 4 of the last 6 games. Like they needed another score. They need another score. They even needed one last year. They got hot last year. Jimmy turned into Michael Jordan. We all know how that went, and they made a run. But big picture, like as far as like sustaining and have sustained success, you need another score. Terry Rozier does that. He's having a career year basically, averaging 23 points a game on career best 46% shooting from the field. He's a solid 3-point shooter, averaging career high in assists, 6.6 assists, so he can play make. Doesn't get to the rim like an elite amount, but gets to the rim more than Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry he doesn't get to the rim anymore. Like you have some type of rim pressure there with Terry Rozier. Yeah, you could pass out of those drives. Not a great defender, is small, which we can get into, later in the episode. That'll be a question of how they fit him with Tyler Hero, but he's going to help the offense. And this team needed that. So they used the expiring contract of Kyle Lowry, which was their biggest trade chip right now, as far as like realistic things they would put into play. They had to give up a first-round pick, which I know maybe some didn't think it was worth giving up a first-round pick, but if you're going to do a win-now move like they just did, there's a price to pay. And they basically made a decision.
Say, you're like Terry Rozier's worth a first-round pick. When you think about some of the guys who fetch first-round picks.
Yeah. And like this is the window now. Like for so long, the Heat, I mean, they hadn't made a trade since the Kyle Lowry deal 3 years ago, like a significant trade. The Heat has been waiting, like, okay, we're not gonna give up our assets, we're gonna wait and do whale hunting, wait for the big star to come available. But at some point, like Jimmy's window's closing. You gotta go for it right now. I'm not saying Terry Rozier moves the needle to make them all of a sudden a championship team and on par with the Celtics, but this group has shown you that they can do it. They've done it
right.
Really the last 4 years, pretty much made deep runs in the playoffs. You add a guy like Terry Rozier, who again having a career year is going to help with the offense. This is a win now move. They sacrifice a little bit of the future. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, win now move, but multiple, like multiple years of team control here. He's not a rental here. They're getting a guy who I think the way to look at this is one of two ways. When you talk about it, does this put them in the same category as the Celtics? Does this make them a championship contender? It all depends how close you think they were already, right? Because no, Terry Rozier is not an all-star. He is now, I guess he's the fourth best player on this team. What kind of difference does that guy make? What kind of difference does that guy make? Not a huge one, but when you're talking about marginal, like if you think that the Heat, again, the Heat beat the Celtics last year, obviously, like you said, they've proven they can do it. I think he's a significant upgrade over Kyle Lowry, I think, which is probably like where we should start because, it's a pretty low cost way to upgrade. Yes, you give up a first round pick, but again, that's one first round pick. That's like the price of doing business. One first round pick for a guy who's under team control for 3 years, I think, left on his
2 more years after
contract.
this.
2 years after 2 years after this one. Yeah, 3 including this one. 29, so he's not like young, but he's probably
still
not
in his prime, obviously.
He's not going to he shouldn't tail off significantly during this deal. Like he's it would be shocking if he craved, is he going to average 23 in Miami like he's doing right now? No, obviously not. But he was he's become, I don't want to say he's not an all-star, obviously. He's become a very good player on a very bad team, right? He's been kind of like the second best player on one of the worst teams in the league for basically his entire time in Charlotte, right? Whether it was playing a little bit with, I guess he was there with Kemba for probably the beginning and the weird,
LaMelo.
like the Devontae Graham run and now LaMelo. He's kind of always been the number 2 guard and a very productive number 2 guard for a really bad team because those teams have pretty much always been terrible. But he's also, again, we talked about the fact that it's crazy that he's been in Charlotte longer than he was in Boston. He's a pretty great role player for the Celtics. That's why he got that big contract from Charlotte. So it'll be really interesting to see how he can shift back into being, the fourth option really on the court, at least when the starters are out there.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the big question, right? Like how, was playing very well offensively with the Hornets as kind of almost their number 1 guy because LaMelo's missed so much time.
Yeah, LaMelo's missed a lot of time this year, yeah.
He's been almost basically the primary guy, and he's produced and efficient. Like you can say, like, oh, he's produced on a bad team, but like he's pretty efficient. 46% shooting from the field for a 6-foot guard, like that's good. But now he's not gonna have the ball in his hands as much. He's gonna be more of a spot up shooter. Obviously, he'll still get chances they need him to put pressure on the rim, so he's gonna get chances to do stuff with the ball in his hands. But it's gonna be more of a spot up shooting role, right? So that is the question, like how does he fit within the offense there? Because Tyler Hero, Bam, and Jimmy are going to get most of the usage. We'll see. Again, we don't know until these guys get some an extended stretch together. But I think, like you said, I think it was worth making the move because they needed to do something. They could not just stay as is, unless they just basically wanted to. Like not punt because you never know what could happen.
Year, yeah, right.
But like you're taking a risk of it not going well because it's like Tyler said, the energy just was off, and we can get into Kyle Lowry later and kind of his legacy with the Heat and how it went, the 3-year run. But it had run its course. We saw that over the last week. I mean, it kind of was crazy because like I think a month ago you and I were saying Kyle Lowry's been good. He's been fine.
Yeah.
He's played most games. He's been efficient. He was shooting like 40% on threes. Like, he's been kind of what you would want at this point of his career, but the past week or two have just been bad, and that's kind of what changed everything. I think he had missed his last 18 threes.
Yeah, once that went away, because he's so limited, and like we were like his limitations are kind of fine if he's making the shots because you've got 3 guys who put a lot of pressure on the rim. There's not space there for Kyle Lowry, right? Like if you're gonna play him with Hero and Jimmy and Bam, those 3 guys are in attack mode all the time. And even Jaime Jaquez to an extent when he's out there. But once he is not making his threes, he is just kind of an absolute zero on offense now, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think one big upgrade you got with Terry Rozier is he's going to take shots. Like he's going to take open shots. Yeah. Like there were so many times Kyle Lowry would finish a game with 3 shot attempts or 4 shot attempts. Mm-hmm. You need somebody for space, just for spacing around Bam and Jimmy, and even Tyler, because Tyler operates on the mid-range too. Mm-hmm. You need someone around them that's going to take open shots and hit them, preferably, obviously. But Terry Rozier is going to do that. He's taking 8 threes a game this season.
Yeah.
18 shots a game. He's not going to put up that volume with the Heat.
36%, I think.
35.8%, 36%, basically. Like he's going to take the shot, which is, again, just a big difference from what Kyle was doing. So, you lose a little bit of leadership. You lose a little bit about that, like that savviness of that experience of Kyle Lowry, who's just going to like take charges and just be pesky and bother teams. But I think everything else Terry Rozier gives you, especially on the offensive end. And defensively, like, yes, he's not a elite defender, but he's quick. He's quicker than Kyle Lowry. Like, he'll probably be able to make better rotations. He might not be able to guard post-ups like Kyle Lowry can, but he'll be able to, he's getting 1 steal game. Like, he'll be able to force a few turnovers just because of his speed. So, I get it. I just, part of me thinks it could, like, go wrong for them. Like, if this doesn't work out and they lose in the first round, he doesn't move the needle that much, and he gave up a first-round pick, and now, you look into next season and they're right with the second apron.
Yeah.
And they can't re-sign Caleb Martin, and they can't, so there are ways that this could go sideways for them. But I understand them making the move in the moment because it was really the best deal they could get. They weren't going to get DeJounte Murray. It would have cost too much.
Are they going to get a better player
it.
than him here?
No.
Right. That probably not. I guess the counter argument is, like you said, do they wait and
for Donovan Mitchell, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. But again, the Heat have been waiting for a long time.
That's the thing. At a certain point, you can't wait anymore. Yeah.
You can't wait anymore. And I think, I don't worry about the first round pick at all. Like a 2027 first, whatever. Like it's the cost of doing business to me.
The only thing with that is you need your first round picks to get stars, right? You need
right.
Right. And again, they've been waiting this for years, so there's no guarantee it'll happen. But if Donovan Mitchell asks for a trade in the summer, and you go from having 3 first round picks that you could trade to 2 or 1, really, we can only trade 1 first round pick now after this. They don't have the assets to get a deal done.
Will the second one open up? Will it be if you waited or
no?
Because
after this draft, they will still only have 1 pick.
Only have 1 available.
Because they have the OKC 25 and 26 tied up, and then 27 and 28 tied up with Charlotte. Mm-hmm. That means you can only trade either 2030 or 2031 after this draft. You can't trade both of those. So only one,
right.
Only 1 pick. So they're really, they could create first round picks by trading somebody else, to get a first round pick in exchange or whatever. Like there's ways to get creative, but for the most part, they don't have the ammunition to compete with like Brooklyn.
No.
For stars, if someone asks for a trade. So that is the risk you take. But again, they're making a win now move. They're going for it because Jimmy is 35 years old and he's not getting any better. Like you got to go for it right now. So I understand why they did it.
Yeah, I think that, and honestly, I think the Jaime Jaquez turning into like a home run pick, there was like this kind of like magical idea that the Heat were going to go from being title contenders with Jimmy Butler and then pass the torch to Bam and Tyler in a couple years, and it was going to like still keep working. And all of a sudden, like that kind of looks like it could happen because you throw Jaime Jaquez in there too, and that's to me like that the 2027, like you said, it hurts because of what it allows them to trade, but they can, to me, like going for it and trading away a first round pick to get Terry Rozier, even if, like you said, it could backfire in some ways. Like, it doesn't feel to me at all like the Heat team is like mortgaging any of its future for the short term. Like, they got to try to win while Jimmy's here, but I also think they're going to be like okay when he's gone. So I think like loading up now to try to make a run here this year and like you get Terry Rozier for next year too. You kind of got this 2-year window. It feels like with Jimmy, maybe it stretches to 3. He'd be 37 by then, which would be, kind of unprecedented for a best player in a championship team. But the Rozier to me, like I think the multi-year nature of this deal is pretty enticing because he's not a star, obviously. He's not Donovan Mitchell, but you're now in this position where you've got an elite number 1. You got one of the better number 2s in the league in Bam. Now you got to trust that like Tyler keeps progressing. You got to trust that Jaime Jaquez is going to be, is he the 4th best player in this team still? Possibly. And that would be huge. Yeah. Like if Terry Rozier's your 5th best player, like you've got to be a title
team.
contender. Yeah, you've got to be a title contender in that case. Does it guarantee them a championship? No, but I don't know if trading for Donovan Mitchell makes you a lock for a championship either.
Yeah, it's fair. And you could also say, like, yeah, they could keep money. You know, they would be under the apron if they didn't trade for Terry Rozier and just kept Kyle Lowry and let his contract expire. But they still can't sign like an outside free agent as good as Terry Rozier for $20 million. They don't have that. So this is their way of kind of turning Kyle Lowry into
they got something out of Kyle Lowry, which is like, I mean, he's negative value. It kind of feels like at this point, which is why you had to attach a first round pick.
Now it might cost you Caleb Martin in the offseason because you probably won't be able to sign him unless they shed more money. But maybe they would in their minds are like, someone's going to overpay Caleb. They're going to pay him like $14-15 million, and we're probably not going to match it anyway. So whatever, like we're probably going to keep him anyway. So again, I understand. I understand the logic, and I don't think. I don't want to speak for the people, but I don't think it's hard to criticize the move, even if it backfires. Like they're going for it. Like that's what you want, right? As a fan, like you want a team to go for it right now. So even if it backfires, like I think they still like. You still give them credit for going for it, and like, yes, it's going to cost them more money in the future, and you know that there's been a whole narrative of like the Heat are cheap, they want to avoid the tax, this and that, and yes, while this does make this year's tax bill a little cheaper because your Terry Rozier makes less than Kyle Lowry. The next few years, it adds a lot of money to the tax bill.
Yeah, to me, like it's just kind of low risk. Like the backfire potential here is you lose Caleb Martin and. You miss its opportunity cost, right? You miss the chance to try to get another guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I've watched a lot of Kyle Lowry this year, right? The Hornets are one of the 3 worst teams in the league. I'm very excited to see what he brings to Miami because I know he's a good player, but it's kind of like it's always hard to judge a guy when they're kind of languishing in a terrible situation. And again, like I watched him like once this year. I guess the Heat played him at some point. Like I don't have a single like Terry Rozier memory from this season, but I always liked him in Boston. He's had a nice run in Charlotte, obviously, and the numbers at least are compelling.
3 games against the Heat this year, 34 points on 10 of 17 shooting from the field and 8 of 13 shooting on threes, 13 assists. 28 points on 10 of 14 shooting from the field, 5 of 6 shooting on threes, and then 26 points on 8 of 23 shooting. Not as efficient, but he's played really well against the Heat this year. I think the Heat have noticed that, right? So, this team needed a jolt offensively, and hope is he'll provide one. Can I go over my concerns? Because we've talked.
Well, which is one other thing. He really does change the dynamic of this team a lot. He and maybe this ties into your concerns. Like they haven't had a point guard like him since
Goran, maybe.
Yeah, I was saying Kendrick Nunn, kind of, right? Is probably the closest thing, but like it's been a while since they've had like I don't want to say like a gunner for a point guard, and we'll see what Terry Rozier is when he gets into a situation where he goes from being, like you said, really the best player on the team for a lot of the year in Charlotte to the 4th, the 5th best player in Miami. But after 2.5 years of Kyle Lowry, who is a very deliberate point guard, I would say.
Yeah.
At least in the half court, getting like kind of like a speedy guy, like you said, who's taken, I don't know how many shots a game he's taking, but 8 threes a game. Like they're going to look very, very different, at least to start, I think.
Yeah, the shot distribution is going to be different too. He's taken 20 or more shots in 12 games this year. I don't know if he'll take 20 or more shots in one game with the Heat.
Yeah, unless there's like a bunch of guys hurt.
So it's going to be not only different for the Heat, but it's going to be different for him. And that'll be interesting to see how he fits in. Like you said, like how will he fit into being not a role player, but more of a role player than he is now, for sure.
He's a role player. He's not going to be one of the 3 best players on the team. You're a role player at that point.
Yeah, so I like the concept of it. The idea of it is nice, but there's still a lot to be worked out and to be learned from how this works because the fit is interesting. He addresses a few needs that the Heat have, but he hasn't played that role in a while. So we'll see how he fits.
Okay, so your concerns, you want to get into those?
Yeah, so my concern is this offense is not good, and it hasn't really been good for 2 seasons.
And we've talked a lot about it the last couple of weeks. The offense is tailed off a lot. The defense has come together a little bit.
And we even talked about when it was working, like beginning of the
Yes.
year where they were like 12th in offense. Like it was a little fluky. Like they were making a ton of threes. Like it was bound to drop off at some point, and we've seen that over the past month or so. They have the third worst offense in the NBA in January. Last year they had one of the top, like bottom 6 offenses in the league in the regular season. They're just not built to be an efficient offense. They take a lot of mid-range shots. They don't go to the rim much. They don't take enough threes. They're not good finishing around the rim. So they need something to fix that, right? And in theory, Terry Rozier should. He gets to the rim more than Kyle Lowry. He still doesn't get to the rim a lot, but compared to Kyle Lowry, he gets to the rim a lot more, probably like 3 or 4 more shots a game at the rim compared to Kyle Lowry. But he's not a good finisher around the rim. He's shooting 57% at the rim, which is not good. 28th percentile in the NBA. So another player who struggles to finish at the basket, which doesn't solve that issue for the Heat. It puts more pressure on the rim, but he's not a good finisher. Takes a lot of mid-range shots. 51% of it. No, sorry. He's a good mid-range shooter, so he's gonna shoot some mid-range. I mean, I'm sure that he will try to get him to shoot more threes, even than he is now, because they need that from him. But he takes mid-range shots. Like he take 59th percentile on mid-range attempts, so he's above average as far as like mid-range attempts. So my concern is that like it's going to be more of the same, where you have a guy, another small guard, who doesn't get to the rim that much, is not a good finisher at the rim, and then defensively, pair him in the backcourt with Tyler Hero competes on defense, and Terry Rozier is going to compete on defense, but they're physically limited. Like they're smaller guards, so teams can take advantage of them. So it'll be interesting to see how Eric Spoelstra like kind of tries to hide that and make up for that. You have Bam and Jimmy that should help, and then maybe Haywood Highsmith starts at the 4 to kind of make up for some of those issues in the backcourt, where he can provide 3 guys that are really good defenders who could switch most things around Tyler and Terry Rozier. But those are my concerns. Does he really fix the issues the Heat are having offensively, as far as not being able to finish at the rim, not going to the rim as much, and just taking mid-range, like too many mid-range shots. So, and then defensively, obviously, the natural concerns.
Yeah, it's they do have a lot of mid-range guys now, and that's not a recipe for success typically. They have those 3 got to be 3 of the better mid-range players in the league, right? Rozier, Jimmy, and Tyler. I don't know what Jimmy's like statistically, but obviously we trust it once it gets there. I think the fit is going to be fascinating, just how the starting lineup comes together, and kind of the most important thing, because as we've seen the kind of 3 main guys this year, we haven't seen them a lot together, Jimmy, Bam, and Tyler, but they also just haven't played particularly well together. So adding, that's a whole new element added there. And now the rotations are going to be interesting too, because like obviously Jaime Jaquez has been kind of this revelation as like a 6th man, like can run the offense when the main guys are out. All the 4th quarter minutes he's played, all that kind of stuff. They've got a lot of guys who can like run the offense by themselves now. Kind of like, Bam's obviously unique. I don't think of him in that same category, but between obviously Jimmy, Tyler, who was the 6th man of the year a couple years ago, Terry Rozier, who was like kind of like has that profile. Like if you just like look at his stat lines, you're like, oh, that guy's like Lou Williams, basically, right? Like he plays that kind of way, with the shot distribution, the assist number, like everything. And Jaime Jaquez, who's done that too. Like the rotation component of this, which is, I think secondary in importance to like this team's best lineup, including their best players, needs to be much better. And I think that is what is most important about this edition. But they really kind of do have like a wealth now of quality scoring options. I don't know, to me, just like looking at this roster, just like reading off the names of it, it's like this team looks a lot better today than it did 5 hours ago.
Yeah, and one other thing that goes like that Terry Rozier will help is he draws fouls. He's not like Jimmy Butler, but he can get to the free throw line, averaging 5 free throws a game. Like for a smaller guard, he's pretty good in that area. And this team needs free throws. Like it gives this offense oxygen, right? Like because they do struggle so much. Any easy points you can get are good. So help in that way. And yeah, as far as the rotation, like you wonder what this means for Josh Richardson, right? Especially when Jaime comes back. Like his playing time was already starting to diminish a little bit.
Yeah.
Now with Terry Rozier in there, does that mean he's completely out of the rotation when this team is healthy? Could be, right? So there are implications, all up and down the roster really, as far as like roles changing, rotation like spots maybe changing. Yeah. So it's going to take a bit. Like you can't expect this to work immediately, but the good thing for the Heat is they have 39, 38 games left, right? So they'll have time to figure it out.
Yeah, I think the thing you hit on to me that's kind of most interesting is the fact that it feels like every move the Heat has made basically for the whole Jimmy Butler era has been geared around getting better defensively, and this is kind of an outlier where I think at various points throughout this run, at least I've been frustrated. Like they had some good offensive lineups, and it felt like they would just always prioritize the defensive looks first. And this is an outlier with it. Like even you look at some like the mid-season trades they've made over the years, whether it was Andre Iguodala right before the bubble, Jay Crowder, Trevor Ariza, obviously it wasn't a mid-season trade, but getting PJ Tucker. Like I'm just thinking all the big acquisitions.
Victor Oladipo, I guess, but he
Victor
was
Oladipo. Like both. Honestly, even he was like he was always more exciting, kind of as a defensive potential guy. Sure. This is like the first time that they're not being like, we've got a top 10 defense, let's try to make it a top 5 defense.
Right.
And that is like, do you, and not that Kyle Lowry was great defensively, so like, what are you really sacrificing there? Are you going to get significantly worse with Terry Rozier in the lineup than Kyle Lowry? I probably not, but it does feel like a time when you like, the risk is you end up being kind of like one of those like identity-less teams where you're like the 11th best defense and the 19th best offense, and all of a sudden you're just like, blah.
You need Terry Rozier, not by himself, but just like the whole, like his effect on the rest of the lineups and rotation. Like you need this offense now to be above average.
Yeah. Yes. 100%.
You can't just go from like 28th best offense in January to
like the
23rd best offense in
exactly.
February. Like that's not the idea of this. You got to have like at least an average offense, because I mean, I guess maybe you're getting marginally better defensively, Kyle Lowry, Terry Rozier, but it's not by much. Like you're not gonna be a top 5 defense probably with this group. You're gonna be you hope to be like fringe top 10, like 10. I think they're 10th right now, like 10th, 9th. But if you're going to be a championship contender, if you have the 10th or 9th best defense, you got to at least be an average offense. You can't have the 20th best offense. So we'll see. That's going to be obviously something we monitor all year, kind of how the offense now works. Maybe not right away, but for the next month and a half, like if it's noticeably better, it's more efficient. If that's the case, then this move is worth it.
Yeah. 28th best offense, you said right now. It'll be interesting starting February 1st. We track that the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Where they kind of wind up will be very telling.
They're 20th best offense right now overall for the season, but they have the 28th best offense in January.
Okay.
Yeah. Because they were like 15th.
Yeah, they were top half. Yeah, for a while. Uh-huh.
So they've fallen to 20th, which again is kind of like a little better than last year, but it's not where you want to be. If you want to be a top 4 seed in the East, you can't have the 20th best offense in the NBA.
Yeah, unless you have the number 1 defense.
Number 1 defense. Which kind of like Minnesota. Like Minnesota, I think is like the 17th best offense, but they have the number 1 defense, and that's why they're number 1 and number 2 in the West.
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to point out is this is the first time I can remember, and I haven't gone through all the trades in Heat history, but that they've traded away a first-round pick, and the player coming back is not like an all-star player. Like they rarely do that. So I think it speaks volumes again as to like their thinking, their logic behind this move of like, we got to go for it now. Like they finally feel the urgency of like, this is it. Like
Jimmy's they've been putting it off.
Yeah.
It does feel like the Damian Lillard trade, like that was, that was the move they wanted to make, right? I mean, it was the move. The guy we had him and Bradley Beal, right, were like the two guys that felt like we talked about since this podcast started. And both of those guys obviously moved in the offseason. The Heat didn't get either of them. and I don't want to say they were stuck, but like you said,
kind of.
How much longer could they wait? And like,
Yeah,
does Donovan Mitchell move the needle in the way that even those two guys did?
right.
I don't know. So,
especially if you're trading away high, especially if you're trading away Tyler Hero in that move. Like, yes, you're getting, I guess, maybe a little better, right? But you're still trading away one of your best players for a guy who's good, but
you're
losing
a lot.
some.
Like I said, like you just look at the names on the roster. Like this team feels way deeper than it did before this trade. How will the pieces all fit together? Like that's the big.
That remains to be seen. Yeah.
But you know, like a pretty good fantasy lineup, I guess. I don't play fantasy basketball, but got a lot of productive players on this team.
Terry Rozier, Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, Jaime Jaquez, and Bam Adebayo lineup. How about that?
Like that's pretty good. That's like, you know, 2 All-Stars, former 6th man of the year, one of
the best young players in the NBA.
Jaime Jaquez be a future All-Star maybe, and then like Terry Rozier. I don't know how to define Terry Rozier. Like he's not even like a fringe All-Star, but he's kind of got the stats to be a fringe All-Star, and I don't know. But
one of the best 5th best players on the team in the NBA.
Yeah.
Right? Like I mean, he probably is. If he's your number 5, like you said, you have a good team. So
yeah, maybe that's what we should do next week. We'll list the best 5th starters in the league.
He has to be up there, I would think.
It has to be, and that's what you need. I mean, you look at every championship team, and there's usually not a hole in the starting lineup. Whether it's Boston obviously is like built up their depth. Obviously, Denver last year, and the teams that falter a lot of times it's like one weak spot you can kind of pick on, and it'll be at Terry Rozier. We just haven't seen him in the playoffs in a long time, so who knows what he can look like come playoff time. But again, I think move they had to make, as you argue, I think a pretty low risk move from my perspective. And certainly an infusion of new energy, kind of when the Heat felt like they needed it most. Do you think this last week upped the urgency to do something like this?
I do, and I think a lot of it is because of the way it's gone. Like Kyle Lowry being moved to the bench, which he wasn't happy about, right? He's talked about his disappointment with that.
Yeah, I wondered if that do you think that preceded this, or do you think they kind of knew that this was maybe coming and they felt like they could do that?
I think maybe a mixture of both things. I think they were just going to do it anyway. Like he wasn't, as soon as he started missing threes, he really wasn't providing anything, right?
Yeah.
And he was better off the bench last season, right? He played well off the bench. I think when he came back from that injury last year, he provided something. So the thought was, well, he can still play 20, 25 minutes, do it off the bench in bench lineups. He can put up more shots because with that starting group healthy, he kind of gets lost. Like even last year when he was around Bam, Jimmy, and Tyler, he doesn't take shots. He's just there. So I think Spo's thinking, maybe we can move him to the bench and re-energize him a little bit. He'll play a bigger role. But it just didn't work out. He never wanted to play off the bench. He always wanted to start. And look, I think we should end the episode by talking about Kyle Lowry.
Yeah.
But real quick, I want to mention one more thing about Terry Rozier. Cool angle of this is, I know it's been going around Twitter ever since the move was made, but Dwayne Wade is his favorite player of all time.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about how when Dwayne was teammates with LeBron, with the Big Three, the Heat, that he was always like he never liked LeBron because he thought Dwayne Wade was taking his shine. And this is Terry Rozier, who grew up in Ohio and in Cleveland for part of his life. He was just a huge Dwayne Wade guy. Just copied him growing up. Like wore this like the arm sleeve like him.
Yeah, been wearing 3 in Charlotte. I would think that's Dwayne Wade inspired.
So just and even like you look at his Twitter account even before the trade was made, like retweeting Udonis Haslem stuff from the Udonis night, retweeting Dwayne Wade stuff from the Dwayne Wade night. Like he just grew up a Heat fan, grew up a Dwayne Wade fan. So this is cool for him to kind of now play for that team and kind of play for the organization his favorite player played for. So I think that's kind of cool to think about, and also I'm sure we'll talk about it with him whenever we get a chance to.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, as far as Kyle Lowry, I think. Unfortunately for him, I think he's going to get a bad rap. Like people are going to look at his time in Miami and think, it's never a success. He didn't do anything. Like he cost too much money. But I think it's better than people are giving him credit for. That first year was good. Like I know he got hurt toward the end. He wasn't himself in the playoffs, but he was averaging 13 points a game, 44% shooting from the field, 38% shooting on threes. Like 8 assists a game, 7.5 assists a game in his first year with Miami. He had a good year that first year. They didn't win a championship.
I remember I still think about we came on, I don't know, in November of that year. I think it was before Bam got hurt and missed a bunch of time that year. And we were like, could
Ingram.
Kyle Lowry be an all-star? And went off the rails, obviously, for a lot of reasons. But it looked like it was going to work out pretty nicely for a little while there.
They went to 2 Eastern Conference Finals with him, 1 NBA Finals. They didn't win a title, but what if they do win a title against Denver in that last season? Is it all of a sudden like a big success for Kyle Lowry in Miami? So considering like the contract and how much it was paid, yes, he never lived up to those expectations. But I think if you tell the Heat when they got him 3 years ago, at 37 years old, what do you expect from the 6-foot Kyle Lowry? Like, how could you expect much different than what he gave you this year? Like he was never like that back end of the deal was never going to be great.
Yeah.
Right. So I think he was, I think his first year and even last year when he came off the bench, like he did some good stuff. This year was not good. Again, the drop off, like he dropped off. He's an older point guard. He's not the same guy. And that's understandable. Again, he's 37 years old. He's going to be 38 in 2 months. He's an older point guard, and old small point guards don't age well. But we're getting him for that first year, the first 2 years, really.
Yeah.
With the hope that would translate into a championship, and it almost did. Now, as far as like Kyle Lowry in the locker room, teammates respected him. I mean, Bam Adebayo today at practice called him one of his favorite teammates ever. Kyle Lowry never really bought into Heat culture. Doesn't mean like he didn't like cooperate, right? He was a veteran. He was set in his ways. Look, PJ Tucker, for all the culture talk we talk about PJ Tucker, he never really bought into Heat culture. He would always be like, oh my God, please don't mention Heat culture again. Like, he was just so sick and tired of hearing it. Like, vets come to Miami, and a lot of times they're set in their ways. They do what they do. They don't want to change what they do. And that's how Kyle Lowry was.
I think, unfortunately, the reason that Kyle Lowry is going to get a bad rap in Miami is I think it was a pretty polarizing move when it happened. I honestly don't remember what we both came on and said in the immediate aftermath of that move, but I remember being pretty reticent about whether it was going to work out, and just with his age and his kind of like, but like I think the reason he's going to get bad rap is that kind of all the worst expectations of what the Kyle Lowry experience would be like in Miami came to fruition, right? Whether it was, like you said, not buying into Heat culture, the conditioning stuff that has followed him for his entire career, that was one of the huge concerns, right? Was he going to buy in? Was he going to get in shape? Was it going to extend his career? Could Miami extend his career?
Right.
And instead we saw kind of like he was hurt a lot, never seemed like he was totally in shape. And obviously the back end, which everyone knew that the back end was going to be tough, was kind of every bit as rocky as people expected it was going to be. He never seemed to like hit the highs, I guess, and the lows were kind of not unexpected, but they were the concerns.
That's fair. I think I was.
But like you said, he also went to a finals and
an Eastern Conference Finals in his first 2 years, both years. I from what I remember, I think most people supported the move. I think the concern was that third guaranteed season on the contract, which again, this is the third guaranteed year. Like if you would have told me 3 years ago, what is it going to look like? I mean, I don't expect him to be averaging 17 points a game on 45% shooting.
Honestly, the third guaranteed year would end up being the least of the worries because you're able to get off of it and get a good player back.
Yeah, at least you're able to flip it, right? It cost your first round pick, but you're able to flip it for something, of quality. So I don't know. I maybe our expectations were just too high for Kyle Lowry at this point of his career. But I do think that first season was good. He missed some time again because of personal reasons. Then the injury in the playoffs kind of derailed him. It was unfortunate, And the second year wasn't as good, but he had some important moments, especially as a reserve, like in the playoffs. He played well for them in the playoffs last year, for the most part. And through the knee pain, like the knee was bothering him all year. And then this year he started off well, and last few weeks have just kind of
I mean, I think you're seeing it, like you said, it's an old point guard, like an old 6-foot point guard who never was in the best shape ever, and like what happens to old out of shape point guards pretty much happened. He could have good stretches, but it never seems sustainable. I'll be interested to see where he lands next.
I was about to say, we'll see where it lands next. Like, I'm sure he's not going to play for Charlotte. Might be a buyout, or maybe they'll trade him somewhere. Philly makes some sense, right? Especially if he gets bought out, because
played at Villanova.
They're actually one of the few teams that's able to get him with the new CBA, because teams over the first apron are not eligible to sign buyout guys that have a salary over the mid-level, which is Kyle Lowry. So that cuts out like half the league. Pretty much most of the contenders aren't eligible to sign Kyle Lowry if he gets bought out. Philly is one of the teams that is eligible to sign him. They're a contender. I'm sure he wants to win. That's home. Nick Nurse is the coach. Like, it makes a lot of sense in Philly. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
All right. I think we can close things out there. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chang. It'll be a very interesting week for the Heat. Couple games coming up. We'll get our first look at Terry Rozier. And we'll be back next week to break down the first days of the Terry Rozier era. You can follow me on Twitter at DBWilson2. One last thing. I know the Heat get a trade exception out of this. Is there anything? Could they? What can they do anything else, or with the cap limitations and all the aprons and all the stuff I don't totally understand? Could they do anything else, or is this it?
I don't even know what to think about trade exceptions. They're never used. Like,
I know,
can't
they
even
never are.
last time. Like,
So
they always
exciting.
just expire.
It's always so exciting.
Yeah.
And then no one ever uses them.
I love how we all write like, this creates a $7.5 million trade exception. Yeah. I don't know if the Heat have ever used a trade exception. I guess they have probably once, but like 90% of the time they just go expire. Nobody thinks about them. So yeah, I guess it's nice to have. It's better than not having one, but I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about that.
But they could do something with it theoretically. Like,
they could. They would have to get someone that's within that salary, within that,
which is not a lot
window.
of NBA players.
It's not a lot,
anymore.
right?
Yeah.
Basically, minimum guys are, maybe I don't even know. Is anybody making like $4 or $5 million? Like, doesn't probably not.
Minimum guys are like, I don't even know.
They have larger trade exceptions too. They have larger trade exceptions too.
Oh, do they?
From previous, like the Victor Oladipo trade they made this offseason, they have one. I think they have one more, I believe, too. So I think they have 3 trade exceptions, but again, I don't expect them to use them because they never do. No team ever does, really. No one does.
Okay. Thanks again for listening. We will be back next week.